Hello, everybody. I'm Mr. Wildcat. Hope you all having a wonderful day today. Now, as you guys have know by now, but we are just days away from major conference realignment in the NCAA, with Oklahoma and Texas moving to the SEC. You have Stanford and Cal moving to the ACC. You have USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington all going to the Big Ten, and Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah all going over to the Big 12. We are still part of the Pac-12 until June 30th, but as we approach the final days of our time in the conference, I thought we look back at our 46 years in the conference, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay. Now, most of what you're about to see will feature the Arizona Wildcats, but of course, there's a couple of other things in particular that we are welcome to take a look at. Now, we're just looking specifically at conference games. Conference games, okay? Arizona's played a series of non-conference, okay, whole bunch of games and stuff outside of the conference. Like I know, back in the day, like we had played schools like Michigan, and Ohio State, and Notre Dame, and Miami, and Georgia, and okay, stuff like that. Those are not eligible for what we're going to be looking at today because those are non-conference games slash bowl games. Okay, so with that ado, and I know that there's a lot of I know there are a lot of games and stuff that Arizona has played during our 46 years, and we don't have time to cover every one of them. But covering them all would turn into like a 2-3 hour video. Believe me, the last time I tried to shoot a video for this, it took over 2 hours, and I'm gonna try my hardest not to make it even close to that. Okay, so we're gonna be diving into right on the spot. And I know that there's going to be other games that Arizona has played that we are not going to be able to cover. However, if you feel that there's anything in particular that we missed, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel because, believe it or not, even after we're done with the Pac-12, there's still a lot more to go in the transition. We have football schedules. We have basketball opponents. We have a whole bunch of other stuff to go into it as well. So you're not going to want to miss that. Okay. So with further ado, let's kick into our recap, shall we? So basically, let's start off by taking a look at Arizona's first season in the Pac, which was 1978, versus how we finished in 2023. Okay. Now back in 1978, we only played 7 conference games compared to the 9 conference games that we play now. Arizona has played 9 conference games since the 2006 season, and I'm not sure where it went up to 8, but we played 9 since the 2006 season. Okay, and in '78 we played. See, Arizona Wildcats, they wound up playing 7 games, and of course you played an 11. You played an 11-game schedule. Now, basically, it allowed the Wildcats to play 4 non-conference games or 5 non-conference games. That is. Okay, so this is a little messed up here. So let me. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. There's 4 non-conference games. Okay. Yep, there's 4 non-conference games on our schedule. I don't know what's happened there, but basically, so we were right about that. Okay, so we played 11 games on the schedule, and if you want to go into a bowl game, you played a 12th. In some schools, it was up to you, but you got to play. You could play a 12th game if you wanted. It's entirely up to you, though. But you only had to play 11 games in a season, and then of course that went up to 12 games as of 2006, which is where the Pac-10 wound up going from an 8-game conference schedule to a 9-game conference schedule. Okay, so back in 1978, during Arizona's time in the conference, we started off mediocre. Towards the bottom of the conference, we finished the season with 3 wins and 4 losses in conference play, and 5 wins, 6 losses overall. Okay. Our first ever conference win in the Pac-10 was against the Oregon State Beavers on September 16, 1978. This game was played just shy in front of about 49,000 fans in Arizona Stadium. The Wildcats wound up winning that game 21-7. Okay, and this was our first conference game in the Pac, also our first conference win in the Pac as well, and also our first home conference win. Okay, first conference loss. Okay, against a Pac-12 10 opponent was on October 14th, 1978, when the Wildcats hosted the California Golden Bears in Arizona Stadium. We lost that game 33-20, the final score. And it turns out that it was not only our first conference loss of the Pac-10, but also our first home loss as well. Okay? Those of you wondering what our first road win in the Pac-10 was, it happened to be the one game that Arizona happened to have won on the road that year. Yes, there were times where Arizona had only won one road game on the. Okay, I know there's a couple of times where the Wildcats had only won once on the road, and I know that we're very similar to current fans are similar to that under Kevin Sumlin. We only won 2 road games in his 3 years with the program. 2018's Oregon State and 2019 against Colorado. Okay, God forbid. So, and then, so our one road win in 1978 was against the Oregon Ducks, 24-3. Yep. The same Oregon Ducks that changed their uniforms on a regular basis, that have become national contenders over the last 15, 20 years. They wind up, they were pretty mediocre during Arizona's inauguration. In fact, they had only won 2 games throughout the entire 1978 season. Those were Washington State on October 28th and Oregon State in November 25th. They lost every other game that year. Okay. And of course, our first road loss, okay, against a Pac-10 opponent was on October 27th, 1978, when the Wildcats headed out to the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum and played the UCLA Bruins. Yeah, I know that you guys are probably thinking, what the hell is Mr. Wildcat talking about? Doesn't USC play at the Coliseum and UCLA plays at the Rose Bowl? Well, today they do. But back in 1978, during our first years in the Pac, USC and UCLA played each other. They wound up playing their home games together in the LA Memorial Coliseum. It basically got to a point where one school would have, especially during weeks where both the Trojans and Bruins would have to play home games in the same stadium. One would play on a Friday while the other would play on a Saturday. And things got even more interesting when the LA Rams wound up playing home games too. Because during our first years in the Pac-10, I think it was the final year or two that the Rams were playing at the LA Memorial Coliseum. Okay, UCLA played at the Coliseum from 1928 when they joined the Pac until the end of the 81 season. And in 1982, the Raiders, they got the green light from the courts to relocate from Oakland to Los Angeles. And they wound up moving into the LA Memorial Coliseum. And UCLA was not too thrilled about the Raiders moving in, so they signed a deal to play at the Rose Bowl. Okay? And ironically, out of the whole situation, in 1995, UCLA and the LA Raiders, they actually went in together in an attempt to build a brand new state-of-the-art stadium at Hollywood Park, in the same site that SoFi Stadium exists today. And this was an effort to keep the NFL in an effort to keep the Raiders in LA after the Rams departed for St. Louis. They were willing to give the Raiders the new stadium that they were desperately wanting. and UCLA had signed on to play in the stadium with the Raiders. But of course, the only way for the NFL to give the green light to build the stadium, as well as the funding for it, of course, um, Al Davis would have been forced to take in an NFC expansion team to replace the Rams. Al Davis said, "Fuck you. Let them build their own stadium. I want to be by myself." And he basically, okay, and just like that, he signed a deal to go back to Oakland, and whoop-de-doo. Um, Shortly after the Rams moved back to LA in the 2016 season, Chargers were given first pick to work out a deal in their hometown and to sign on with LA if things didn't work out. And after the Chargers signed on to move to LA as the LA's second NFL team, the Raiders responded by signing a deal with Las Vegas. And of course, they wound up playing their final years in Oakland while their stadium in Vegas was being constructed. Okay, but enough of that. Okay, 1978 was so long ago. Now, you guys are probably wondering, what were things like back in 1978? Well, Jimmy Carter was president. The United States still had a positive relationship with Iran. Of course, this was a year. This was about a year before the Iranian hostage crisis broke out, and we were very friendly with the Shah of Iran because we wanted his oil as a direct result. So, okay. So let's take a look at 78 as a whole. So, okay. See, you have Dallas that debuts on CBS. You have Annie Hall that won Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Okay. You have April 18th, 1978, U.S. Senate votes to turn the Panama Canal over to Panama Control, effective December 31st, 1999. Okay. You also had, let's see, notable things coming up here. The Montreal Canadiens defeated the Boston Bruins in the Stanley Cup Finals. The FIFA World Cup was held in Argentina. Okay. Argentina wound up defeating the Netherlands 3-1 after extra time to win the World Cup on their home field. The rainbow flag of the LGBT movement flies for the first time at the San Francisco Gay Freedom Day Parade. This was June 25th. So we just passed the 46th anniversary of that particular thing. Okay. Pope Paul VI passes away in August, and Pope John Paul I takes over by the end of the month. But then, of course, shortly after that, Pope John Paul I suffers a heart attack and passes away. Pope John Paul II takes over as the Pope, and he reigns until he's the first non-Italian Pope since Pope Adrian VI in the 1520s. Okay, Pope John Paul II would reign as Pope until 2005. Okay. You also had, let's see, Spain adapts a new constitution, ending 40 years of military dictatorship. Okay. So that's some notable things that have happened. The Rams were still playing at the LA Memorial Coliseum, of course. It was, let's see, the Raiders were still in Oakland. Phoenix, Arizona only had the Phoenix Suns for professional sports. The Cardinals were still in St. Louis. The Coyotes were playing up in Winnipeg as the Winnipeg Jets as a member of the World Hockey Association. And then, of course, you had the Diamondbacks that wouldn't exist for quite a while until 1997. Okay, so that's 1978 as a whole. Fast forward to 2023. Okay, Last ever conference game was against the Arizona State Sun Devils in the Territorial Cup. Our last ever home win was against the Utah Utes just a week before the ASU game. Last road win again was against ASU. Okay. Last conference loss and road loss, both by the same school, USC. Da 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 da. You guys are gonna miss that, believe me. And our last ever home loss in the pack, the Washington Huskies. Okay. So that is pretty much 1970 versus 2023. Now, what happened in between? Now, basically, Arizona's had a handful of coaches throughout the time. Some have stayed some have come and gone after a year or two. Others have stayed quite a while. And then basically, for the most part, coaches would get fired, usually for losing records, or in one case, a sexual harassment claim, and another one was due to a alleged scandal that broke out at the university. Okay, so let's break down some of our notorious. So let's take a moment to look back at some of our notorious coaching that we've had during our time in the Pac-10. First coach to take us into the Pac-10 was Tony Mason, who joined the Wildcats in 1977 in our final year in the WAC, Western Athletic Conference. He had previously coached. Tony had basically just been a coach. He had only coached one other school prior to Arizona, and that was the Cincinnati Bearcats, who were independent. Okay, started off bad, but he basically gave the Bearcats a winning record overall, and it was attractive enough to bring him out to Arizona. Okay, now unfortunately for Arizona, if they didn't know any better, they'd probably been better off not hiring Tony Mason. After the 1979 season, Tony Mason was fired after a slush fund scandal had broken out. And I'm going to read this to you word for word. Okay, this is from a Wikipedia article. Okay, they know this more better than I do, so that's why I'm going to read this word for word. All right, in the spring of 1983, Arizona was placed on probation by both the Pac-10 and the NCAA after it was discovered that the football program was involved in a slush fund scandal by giving players cash payments, which is illegal under the NCAA rules. Tony Mason, Smith's predecessor, was allegedly involved in the scandal. After a 3-year investigation, the NCAA and the Pac-10 both found enough evidence that Mason had covered up the scandal and that the Arizona football program broke NCAA rules by committing academic fraud as well as recruiting violations. The program was handed out infractions by the NCAA, including being placed on probation. The team was originally placed on probation in 1981, and Mason had been fired before the 80 season began, leading to the hiring of Larry Smith to clean up the mess left behind by Mason. During the scandal, the NCAA handed out the following sanctions to the Wildcats, including a 3-year probation, $250,000 fine, loss of several scholarships, and a ban of on-campus recruits during the season, 2-year ban from playing in bowl games, 2-year ban from having games broadcast live on television, and a 2-year ban from being ranked in the national polls. NCAA Pac-10 did not forfeit any of Arizona's wins from Mason's tenure due to the fact that the infractions occurred off the field. And of course, due to the television broadcasting rights for Arizona's games were already booked for the 83 season prior to the ban being handed down, the ban would be in place for the 84-85 seasons, while the other sanctions would take place for the 83-84 seasons. Okay. In addition to this, if the Wildcats were to have finished in first place in the Pac-10, they would be ineligible for conference championships and the Rose Bowl appearance if they were to have ranked that high. And to this date, the Wildcats have yet to make an appearance in the Rose Bowl game. Now, of course, with the Pac-12 officially ceasing operations in just a few days, um, we will no longer be seeing like the Pac-12 the traditional Pac-12 versus Big Ten champions playing each other. Okay, but of course, with us heading into an expanded college football playoff for the upcoming season, that matchup was going to be going away one way or another. Okay, so basically, the Rose Bowl is now part of the college football playoff rotation between the quarterfinals and semifinals. Okay, basically, two games will um, two each year. Two bowl games will serve as the semifinals, while the other four will settle for quarterfinals. And the team who okay, and of course the top four teams, okay, out of the 12 will receive automatic berths to one of the four quarterfinal games. And of course, the Rose Bowl will always be on the line. Okay. Now, during the years that the Rose Bowl is not part of the semifinal, the Rose Bowl will be part of that quarterfinal. And as long as Arizona does well enough, they okay. I'm not sure exactly how that will do, but like rumor has it, the Big Ten, Pac-12, no, Big Ten, Big 12, SEC, and ACC. These four conferences will receive automatic first round buys, most likely, and will get their dibs at one of those four bowl games as a whole. Okay, I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work, but that was a conversation for another game. Okay, that for another video. Okay. We have another couple other scandals that have broken place during Arizona's time in the Pac, but thankfully none of these involve the Arizona Wildcats. Okay, you fast forward to 2005 when USC was under investigation for receiving improper benefits to Reggie Bush. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay. In June 2010, the NCAA imposed sanctions on USC as a result of an investigation into the football program. One of the major focuses was improper benefits or improper gifts given to Reggie Bush. The NCAA found that Bush had received gifts from sports agents Lloyd Lake and Michael Michaels from at least December 2004 in violation of NCAA rules of amateurism. As a result, the USC Trojans were placed on a 4-year probation and forced to vacate its last two wins of the 2004 season, which were against UCLA and the Orange Bowl against Oklahoma, as well as its wins in the 2005 season. Okay, every one of their wins, and the only game they didn't have to vacate was the Rose Bowl because they wound up losing to Texas. Okay. They were also banned from bowl games in 2010 and 2011 and lost 30 scholarships over 3 years. Running backs coach Todd McNair was banned from off-campus recruiting for 1 year after the NCAA determined that he had known about Bush's dealings with the agents. The NCAA also forced USC to permanently disassociate itself from Reggie Bush. And Reggie Bush voluntarily surrendered his Heisman Trophy, in which the Heisman Trophy for 2005, even though there was a lot of debate about whether or not to give it to Vince Young, who was the runner-up for the Heisman Trophy, the Heisman has basically remained vacant for the 2005. Okay. Vacated games included Trojans' Orange Bowl win. And June 6, 2011, the BCS also officially vacated their 2004 BCS National Championship title, while the Associated Press released a statement saying the USC would to keep their AP title. Okay? So that was a lot of fun for USC. Okay? And then fast forward to 2020. Okay? Let's take a look at that one as well. Let's see, I have this right here. What's going? Here we go. Okay, so this is from ESPN. Okay. This is an article from ESPN that dates back to April 19th of this past year, 2024. The NCAA announced penalties for Arizona State and 4 former employees related to recruiting violations that occurred under former coach Herm Edwards. Arizona State received 4 years of probation, an undisclosed fine, vacated games in which ineligible players competed, reduced scholarships, and recruiting restrictions. The NCAA did not provide further details. Okay, so basically, the allegations first came to light 3 years prior, in 2021, when a package of documents sent to the NCAA detailed several recruiting violations, including ignoring restrictions in place during the COVID-19 pandemic recruiting dead period. During the time, a mother of a player purchased travel accommodations for recruits to visit campus. Staff members provided guided tours to roughly a dozen recruits when campus was closed to visitors, and a coach worked out a player in the park. The NCAA found that the Arizona State had offered recruiting inducements, impermissible tryouts, and committed tampering. No individuals were named by the NCAA, nor were there specific punishments provided. Okay? The COVID dead period rules were created not only for the sake of competitive equity, but for the safety and well-being of prospective and enrolled student athletes and their families. Okay? And of course, some individuals at Arizona State, they decided not to take it seriously and took advantage of it. And they wind up paying the price at the end of the day. As a direct result, every one of Arizona State's wins from the 2021 season, including the 2021 Territorial Cup against Arizona, were vacated, as well as all of their wins from the 2022 season, excluding the most of their wins from 2022 were vacated as well, with the exception of State Sun Devils team. Okay. Every one of Arizona State's victories from 2021 and 2022 were vacated, with the exception of the 2022 game versus NAU, which they wind up. The NCAA confirmed that none of the players who were involved with the scandal had actually played in that game, so they were allowed to keep that. But for the others, okay, which were basically against Washington and Colorado, those games got vacated as well. So going to the Arizona State rivalry, okay, duel in the desert. Okay, let's go to that. Okay, so even though the official record shows the Arizona Wildcats lead 51 wins to 45 losses and 1 tie, that 1 tie came in 1987. Arizona State's vacated the 2021 Territorial Cup means that a win gets taken away from Arizona State. So the official record right now is 51 wins for the Wildcats, 44 wins for the Sun Devils, and 1 tie. Okay? Okay? So that is basically, okay. And of course, they didn't, even though the Sun Devils came close to beating the Wildcats in the 2022 Cup, thankfully they didn't have to vacate that because the Wildcats wound up taking that one. Shut up, Sparky. You're my bitch now. Okay. Man, I love seeing ASU in pain. Okay. Let's take a look at some of these. Okay. So we've taken a look at some of the. All right. So now that we've seen some of the troubles. Oh, and by the way, many of you guys are wondering. Okay. There were some games during these during the USC and ASU scandals. Okay, there were some wins. There were some games that were played against Arizona, which Arizona lost to. What happens with those games, you might ask? Does Arizona get the credit for it? Absolutely not. Instead, the game gets taken off the record as if it never happened. Okay, it gets taken off the opposing team's records, and it goes in the books as if the game never happened. Okay. It would have been lovely if Arizona could have gotten those wins, the 2005 against USC, or even better yet, that 2021 victory over ASU. But unfortunately, things don't work that way. Okay. So let's see. Let's go back to here. Okay. So here are some notable coaches that the Arizona Wildcats have had during their time in the Pac. Okay, going back to that. So Tony Mason, he started with the Wildcats. He was fired for being involved with a scandal. So Larry Smith was brought in to coach the Wildcats. He coached the Wildcats through the '86 season. At that point, he was hired away by Southern California. Southern California was offering him a lot more than Arizona could have ever offered. First of all, Southern California had a more traditional powerhouse team that Arizona didn't have. They were also located in the second largest market in the country, which was a huge attraction. And more importantly, USC had disposable income. Since they were a private school in the second largest market in the country with a traditional football powerhouse, they had disposable income up the yin and they could offer him any amount that they wanted that he could not turn down. So Larry Smith, he left the Wildcats for Trojans after the '86 season, but luckily for Arizona, they wound up with Dick Tomey, who came in from Hawaii. He had a successful run, I think it was like 13, 14 seasons with the Wildcats. He led the Wildcats to success throughout the late '80s and had some on and off years throughout the '90s. The Wildcats had some of the seasons the Wildcats have had in the '90s were some of the best seasons that the Wildcats had ever had in program history, including the Desert Swarm in '93, which the Wildcats shared a conference title with USC and UCLA, and that infamous 12-1 season in 1998, which the Wildcats came so close to smelling the roses. But unfortunately, UCLA, the one school that the Wildcats lost to that year, cost it for the Wildcats. Not only by beating the Wildcats during the conference play, but for also blowing their game against the Miami Hurricanes that was originally supposed to take place in the early part of the '98 season, but was rescheduled to the end because of a hurricane that broke out in Florida. Okay? All UCLA had to do in that game in '98 was beat the Hurricanes. UCLA would have landed themselves in the national championship game, while the Wildcats would have gotten the Rose Bowl in return. But unfortunately, things did not work out that way. In 2000, the Wildcats pretty much fell apart. Okay, after starting the season off 5-1 with our one loss to Arizona to Ohio State, they wound up losing the rest of the way through, and there was huge pressure. Even though they've had good seasons, there was expectations about the Wildcats not only winning the conference, which they did in '93, but also, more importantly, making the Rose Bowl, which they were not able to do. So after finishing the 2000 season on a very sour note, the athletics department pretty much had enough of Tomey, and Tomey pretty much had two options: resign or get fired. Tomey decided to take the dignitary way out and resigned. Okay. So Wildcats had a couple of coaches, a few throughout the 2000s, on and off. Didn't do very well. 2004, we got Mike Stoops, who was an assistant coach for the Oklahoma Sooners, one of the strongest football programs in the country at the time. Okay, especially when Mike was the brother of the legendary Bob Stoops, head coach of the Sooners. Da 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 da. Believe me, I don't even know what the hell the Oklahoma song is, and don't even ask me why. Don't even ask me to sing it again. Mike Stoops, he came in. The team was mediocre at first. He eventually got the team out of its hurdles, and he got the team back to prime success once again. And unfortunately, the success was short-lived because after getting the team out of that hurdles, they fell apart into despair. And after about a whole calendar year of no FBS wins, the department decided it was time to part ways with Stoops. We got Rich Rod, who came in, who had coached at West Virginia and Michigan. Okay, had a successful run with the Wolverines, went on to coach at Michigan, and unfortunately, he didn't have a good time at Michigan. And when you coach at Michigan, okay, uh, a 6-6 record is not going to cut it. Michigan as a program, you have to win every fucking week in and week out. You are competing at Michigan. You are competing not only for conference titles but also for national titles as well. So a 6-6 record at a school like Michigan is not going to cut it, and that's why Rich Rod got the boot from Michigan. And we were very fortunate to have fired Mike Stoops halfway through the 2011 season because it gave us the opportunity to get our hands on Rich Rod before any other schools can get their hands on him, particularly Arizona State, who wound up firing Dennis Erickson after the 2011 season due to the fact that the Sun Devils were heavy favorites to have won the South Division title under the first year of the expanded Pac-12. USC was on probation and they were on a bowl ban, and the rest of the division was shit. But unfortunately, for the Sun Devils, the deciding game came down to them versus UCLA, and UCLA wound up the Sun Devils wound up botching a field goal at the end of the fourth quarter to give the Bruins a slight victory. Okay, and because they did not deliver on a divisional title that was expected, Dennis Erickson got the boot, and he was pretty much never heard from again. Rich Rod coached the Wildcats for about 6 years, taking the Wildcats to bowl games 5 out of the 6 years, including a South Divisional title in 2014. However, a disappointing 2016 season and a fraudulent sexual harassment case that came floating after the 2017 season came to an end marked the end for Rich Rod's tenure with the Wildcats. They went out and hired Kevin Sumlin, who had just been fired from Texas A&M, and he had coached Johnny Manziel and a nationally ranked Texas A&M program. Little did we know, we made the really bad choice, because Sumlin pretty much ran the program down the drain. Mismanagement, okay, the inability to, he had the talent, but he didn't handle the talent properly, and mismanagement on the field not only cost us valuable games, but it also resulted in a huge, humiliating loss. You blew a huge lead over Arizona State to lose by 1 point. By that point, everybody wanted his ass. But of course, their Wildcats had signed a huge deal to recruit him. They weren't going to just boot him like that. But of course, after the 2020 season, with the Wildcats went winless, including a huge blowout to Arizona State, that was enough to convince the Wildcats to get rid of them before things got any messier. Then we got Jeff Fish, who basically Jeff Fish was brought in to clean up the program. A lot of people, nobody had heard of him before, and he was not a favorite at first. In fact, this is a guy, okay, how the hell do you lose to NAU out of all schools in the country? NAU, all right? Then, of course, we realized because of the pandemic, Jeff Fish wasn't able to bring any of his recruits for the first year. He was stuck with someone's talent. Then he wound up giving, as time went on, he was finally able to get rid of Kevin Sumlin's talent, replace it with his own, and slowly by slowly, the Wildcats started to improve. And in fact, this past year, they got to a point where they were one of the hottest teams in the country, finishing the 2023 season with the second highest active winning streak in all of college football. The only one who had a longer winning streak than us was Michigan, who won the national championship. Okay, this is a lot of pressure for the Wildcats going in with like 7 win with 7-game winning streak on the line. Okay, best of luck. Okay. So Jeff Fish, he recently got so after the season came to an end, Nick Saban from Alabama retired, and Washington's coach got lured away to Alabama. And what did Washington do? They lured Jeff Fish away from Arizona. Okay, and who did Arizona wind up with? Well, okay, they wound up with somebody that the public had wanted. They wound up with somebody that Wildcat fans had wanted all along. This is the guy that he was the runner-up to Jed Fish in 2021, Brett Brennan. He had worked with, but he had coached at San Jose State. He had also worked with Dick Tomey during Tomey's final year with the program. Okay, Tomey's got so basically Brennan's got big shoes to fill, and luckily we got huge talent that will be coming in, and it'll be up to Brennan to make sure that that talent is put to good use. Okay, making sure that he uses it just like Jed Fish used in his later years, and Dick Tomey used and Rich Rod used when they were coaching, and hopefully Brennan will not be anything like Kevin Sumlin, that fucking piece of shit. Yeah, it got you all worked up. So that's coaching. So that's our coaching stat. So let's look at some of our notable coaches for Arizona. Okay. Now here are some games. Now, of course, there are some games at Arizona. We're not gonna look at. There were some games that we could look at that Arizona wish they had never happened, but of course, it would make me pissed off as a whole. And I'm sure like, Wildcat fans are going to say, "Why did you bring that up?" Okay. Of course, some of these games I've already mentioned myself in the video, and I do apologize for doing it. But of course, this is part of looking back at our 46 seasons with the program. Good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay. So basically, sorry. So let's take a look at some of the greatest moments, okay, that Arizona has played. There's some notable games that we haven't, okay. So, many of you guys know that USC is the one school out of the whole Pac-12 that Arizona had the hardest time beating during our entire time in the Pac-12. The Wildcats had only beaten USC 8 times in program history. And yes, this includes those games that the Wildcats had played in against USC during the 1910s and 20s, while USC was an independent. Okay, and once USC joined the Pac in 1924, we never played USC again until the late 70s when we became a member of the Pac-10. Okay, 1981 would be the very first year that the Wildcats would ever beat the Southern California Trojans, and our only time that we would beat them until the 1990s. And of course, this just happened to have been during a time when USC was the #1 school in the country. And this was a road game, too, at the LA Memorial Coliseum. Arizona wound up defeating USC 16-13 in that game. And it gave them the notable. Okay. And while the Wildcats had a mediocre season that year, it put them on top, and there's nothing here about Arizona being nationally ranked. Of course, they probably weren't nationally ranked after starting the season off again, with losses to Cal and UCLA. Of course, they're not going to be nationally ranked, but of course, it gave the Wildcats a huge boost going into their final games of the season. Okay. We're going to talk. Okay, we will talk about the Arizona State Sun Devils later on down the road because they're that's a huge part of our heritage. Okay, and thing that we're going to be looking back on. Another team that the Wildcats have had a hard time beating would be the Washington Huskies. Okay, the Wildcats never won. Had none, last one had Wildcats had not played the Huskies until we joined the pack in 1978, and of course we would not. We're most likely not to play them again after the Huskies joined the Big Ten. And of course, the only time we would probably ever play USC or Washington again would be um, most likely in a bowl bid. Okay, especially if USC does choose to keep on their longtime rivalries with Notre Dame. Okay, and depending on whether or not the ACC implodes and Notre Dame goes to the Big Ten, there's a possibility that they could keep that as a permanent conference rivalry game with the two. Okay, but okay, there are two games on our schedule that do come to mind when Arizona has faced the Washington Huskies, and these were both back in the 90s. The first one was back in 1992. The Arizona Wildcats were Wildcats came into this game as the number 12 school in the country, and even though they had lost to the Miami Hurricanes at the Miami Orange Bowl earlier that year, which were also number one in the country at the time, the Washington Huskies, they came into Arizona on November 7th, 1992 as the number one team in the country. And the Wildcats went to town with the Huskies, giving them a 16-3 win over Washington in front of 58,510 fans. Okay, this right here pushed the Wildcats up into the top 10 of the national rankings for the 92 season. But unfortunately for the Wildcats, they would go on to lose every remaining game for the year. The Wildcats would eventually land themselves in the Sun Bowl against the Baylor Bears, which coincidentally happens to be the only time Arizona and Baylor have ever played each other. But this will change as the Arizona Wildcats head into the Big 12. Because after all, these two are going to become Big 12 rivals. Baylor is expected to come to Tucson in 2025. So be on the lookout for that. Oh, for those of you wondering, why did that game against Baylor I just talked about in '92? That was the Sun Bowl. Wildcats lost that game 20-15. And of course, with the Wildcats taking on Baylor in 2025, it will be our opportunity to get back at them for that particular game, despite the fact that it happened 32 years ago. Better late than never. Okay. Fast forward a few years later to 1998. This game, and then this, of course, this season was basically the 12-1 win for the 12-1 season for the Wildcats, the best season of all time. The one game that year that pretty much put the Wildcats into hyper gear, the greatest game that had ever happened that season, the one that got them into that groove to basically it put the Wildcats it got them into that groove to keep winning every single game from that point on. Okay, to going to winning just about every game except for UCLA. Washington Huskies were leading in the final seconds. Wildcats had the ball going into the end zone. They had the leap over the lake, is what they call it. This Wildcat player dived over the player's blockage on the end zone, leaped over the pile into the end zone, and scored a touchdown and gave the Wildcats that infamous 31-28 victory. That game put the Wildcats at 5-0 for the year. It's one of the few times the Wildcats had ever won at Husky Stadium in Seattle. It's one of the most intense Husky Stadium in Seattle, along with Austin Stadium in Oregon, and probably the Coliseum in Los Angeles. Three most intense stadiums that Arizona could ever play in. And then, of course, there's Sun Devil Stadium in Tempe. Okay? But, of course, we have more fans that play. We have more Arizona fans in that stadium when we play up in Tempe than we do when we go on the road to California or Oregon or Washington. Okay? Of course, this game was right before. This was unfortunately right before our humiliating loss to UCLA, but the Wildcats would go on and slaughter every remaining opponent the rest of the way out. Okay, after the '98 season. Okay. Now, as we fast forward into our favorite games and stuff, throughout the 2000s, as we mentioned before, the Wildcats were pretty much a sleeper for the most of the decade. Because after the '98 season, they were not eligible for a bowl game until the 2008 season. But of course, they didn't stop the Wildcats from playing the infamous upset from time to time. And in 2005, my first year as a Wildcat, we wound up seeing it was one of a very few games, one of only 3 games the Wildcats had actually won that whole year. And it was probably one of the most satisfying one of them all. You see, it was homecoming, November 5th, 2005 to be exact, my 19th birthday. It was homecoming week at Arizona Stadium, okay? And we were playing the UCLA Bruins in front of 55,775 fans, okay? UCLA was undefeated going into this game, number 7th team in the country. And they control their destiny not only for a conference title, but for that a Rose Bowl bid / national championship bid. Okay, Arizona slaughtered them. All right, 52-14. Okay. The Wildcats dominated on both sides of the ball in their first win over an unbeaten opponent in homecoming games since their infamous win over Washington in 1992. It was also Arizona's first victory over UCLA since 1999 and their first at home since 1996. In addition, it was the first time under Stoops that the Wildcats had won consecutive games. Prior to this, the last time Arizona had won at least 2 straight games occurred early on in the 2002 season. Damn! Boy, Arizona sure sucked during the early part of the 2000s. Okay? And that's why we're not going to be looking at it. And no wonder why we had like 3 or 4 coach changes during the early 2000s. Okay? We fast forward to 2006, okay? And coincidentally, our homecoming game, it happens to be our homecoming game, okay? Wildcats finished a 6-6 record, but unfortunately for the Wildcats, they did not get a bowl bid because at the time there was a policy stating that you had to have a winning conference record in order to have a shot at a bowl bid, especially at a time when there were so many other schools on top that the Pac-12 they only had so many bowl bids, and there was so many other schools on the top that had to be placed in those bowl bids. Okay. So Arizona, they actually won 3 consecutive games during this time. They had beaten Washington State the week before, 27-17 on the road. They had also beaten the Oregon Ducks 37-10 on the road that year as well. And, oh my Lord, okay. And of course, the Wildcats, they wind up defeating the California Golden Bears 24-20. California came into this game the number 8 seed in the country, and with their one loss coming to Tennessee on the road. Okay. Okay. Here we go. The Bears would respond in the next series with a long pass to LaVille Hawkins, but he would trip inside the 5-yard line before reaching the goal. Cal could not capitalize, having to put up a field goal, earning them a 24-20 deficit. A stop on the Arizona defense gave the Bears the ball again. Longshore apparently hit Jackson for a 63-yard score with just over 2 minutes left, but a video ruled his foot out at the 41-yard line. A few plays later, Longshore's pass was batted and intercepted with less than 2 minutes to clinch the game for Arizona. Student section widely rushed the field as Cal was taken out of the national title picture for the season. Okay. Now, despite all this, the Wildcat. Now, of course, the following week, Cal would eventually lose to USC, but they would land themselves in the Holiday Bowl against Texas A&M. Okay. As for the Arizona Wildcats, okay, they would go on to beat the Oregon Ducks in Autzen Stadium. They would lose to the Sun Devils in Arizona during Thanksgiving weekend. Okay. Next game on our schedule is 2007. This is not our homecoming game. This is actually a road game against the Oregon Ducks. Okay. This is a Thursday night game with the Oregon Ducks placed in the number 2 as the number 2 school in the country. Okay. Now, of course, before this, I'd like to remind you guys that Arizona Wildcats had defeated the Washington Huskies 48-41 just 2 weeks prior. Okay, and that game right there is the last time the Arizona Wildcats had ever won at Husky Stadium. Okay, was October 27th, 2007, with a 12 o'clock game. Okay. Of course, the Cats would win 3 consecutive games that year, including a trip to Husky Stadium, UCLA on November 3rd, and of course this game on November 15th, with the Wildcats winning 34-24. Now this particular game right here, okay, we're gonna have to go look at the Oregon Ducks' thing here because this was. So, game summaries. Here we go. Okay. The Ducks entered this game as the number 2 school in both the AP and BCS rankings. A win in this game, followed by wins against UCLA and Oregon State, would most assuredly result in the birth of a BCS National Championship game in New Orleans. The Ducks started the game hot, with a 39-yard touchdown run by Dennis Dixon and a successful 2-point conversion. Following Arizona's interception, the Ducks had the ball back on the Arizona 4-yard line, threatening to score again. Dixon wound up throwing an interception that returned 45 yards and eventually capitalized by the Wildcats as a touchdown, cutting the score 8-7. The Ducks responded with another solid drive to the Arizona 15 and looked to score again. On the 2nd and 7 play, Oregon quarterback Dennis Dixon, who at the time was the leading Heisman candidate, he fell to the ground without being touched. Upon review, it was clear that Dixon twisted his already injured knee and tore his ACL. It would later be revealed that Dixon had actually torn the ligament in the previous week's game against Arizona State. Well, if that's the case, if he had been injured the week before, why did you make him play this game? Okay? Not trying to defend Oregon, but Oregon, why would you put a injured quarterback on the fucking field knowing that this was, okay, knowing that he was already injured? Not acceptable. Sorry, but not acceptable at any kind. Okay? Totally unacceptable. But of course, this gave the Wildcats, they were able to take advantage of this. Dixon wound up being out for the remainder of the year. Okay? Oregon's misfortunes mounted. Arizona scored a touchdown on an interception return, another on a punt return, and Leaf suffered an ankle injury all before halftime. Oregon tried to rally from a 31-14 deficit, but lost 34-24, ended the national championship hopes. The following day, it was announced that Dixon's injury would end his season and any hopes for the Heisman Trophy. And guess what? Oregon wound up losing their remaining games to UCLA and Oregon State, but they were lucky enough to land themselves a seat in the Sun Bowl. Now, for those of you wondering, Who actually won the conference championship that year? Well, it was shared between USC and Arizona State. Hey! Okay. Thankfully, USC owned the tiebreaker based on the head-to-head matchup between the two. They got the Rose Bowl bid. So take that, Sun Devils. All right. Okay, we have 2008. Okay. The one game that does come to mind for that year was our victory over Arizona State. Now, that game going in, it was a playoff game for a potential spot in the Vegas Bowl, which would eventually, which we would wind up getting over versus BYU. Okay. Who is going to be joining who Arizona will be joining as conference rivals in the Big 12 coming up. Now, of course, both teams were in potential for a bowl game. It was basically win or go. Okay, it was basically win and get into a bowl game, or lose and go home. Wildcats were playing for their first bowl bid in a whole decade, while the Sun Devils were playing for their fifth consecutive bowl bid fifth consecutive year to go to a bowl game. Okay, Arizona wound up winning 31-10. And the only time the Wildcats would beat the Sun Devils during my 4 years at the university, they got to go to the Vegas Bowl and beat BYU. Okay. Now, of course, heading to 2009, okay, the Wildcats took that success from the 08 season and they rode on top of it even more. They wound up having this backup quarterback, Nick Foles, who apparently had played over at Michigan State, and he was looking for playing time, so he transferred to Arizona. He was technically a redshirt during my senior year, which is why we never got to see him play. But after the starting quarterback got injured at the Iowa game, Nick Foles wound up taking over. And if Nick Foles had wound up playing, if he had played that whole game against Iowa, there would have been a strong chance the Wildcats would have won that game against Iowa. But they didn't. Okay? Nick Foles became the new secret weapon for the Arizona Wildcats going to the 2009 season. The Wildcats were nationally ranked for the first time since the 2000 season. And on top of that, the Wildcats, at one point, believe it or not, were in potential to a conference championship title. On November 21st, 2009, Arizona Wildcats had the honors of hosting the Oregon Ducks. This game right here, the winner controlled their destiny to the Rose Bowl. Win the rest of the way out, you get the Rose Bowl. Okay, you win the conference title and the Rose Bowl. Okay, and that Rose Bowl bid. Okay, miss, and your Rose Bowl chances are pretty much slim to none. Okay, this game had a lot on the line for both programs, and that's why ESPN Game Day wanted to come into Tucson. They basically parked themselves up on the U of A Mall. The ESPN Game Day is basically a early morning pregame show going into the long day of college football broadcasts. Okay, they go over all the different matchups that are going to be happening, and the analysts predict who exactly is going to win each and every one of those games. Now, I don't recall exactly who they predicted who was going to win between Arizona and Oregon, but Arizona put up a really strong fight to a point where actually we wound up having to settle going into double overtime. And unfortunately for the Wildcats, this game did not come out the way we wanted to. And this was actually the first time that I actually had no respect for I pretty much lost respect for the Oregon Ducks after this game. Okay? They even made a note of it on Wikipedia that this was a college game day game. This was pretty much one of the very first times that college game day actually came to Tucson. Oregon Ducks wound up beating us 44-41 during this particular game. Okay, Wildcats. Okay, so the Wildcats did lead going into the fourth quarter, but the Oregon Ducks wound up tying. They forced a tie, and then we both scored touchdowns, 7 apiece in the first overtime. In the second overtime, the Wildcats scored a field goal, but the Ducks responded with a touchdown. And that right there, holy fucking Christ, that put the end to Arizona's Rose Bowl bids. Okay. The result left Arizona reeling, especially since the Wildcats appeared to have the game in hand in the fourth quarter. Arizona led by a touchdown late when Foles attempted to put the game away with a pass into the end zone. Wide receiver Terrell Turner tipped the ball, and Oregon's Thomas Jackson III intercepted it and took a touchback. Okay. In winning, Arizona eliminated Oregon. In winning, Oregon eliminated Arizona from Rose Bowl contention. Okay. But the Arizona Wildcats, they did not go empty-handed. They wind up defeating the Arizona State Sun Devils 20-17 on the final second field goal. Their first victory at Sun Devil Stadium since 2001, and they would actually go on and beat the USC Trojans in their final victory at the LA Memorial Coliseum, 21-17. Okay. So, let's see. We'll talk about, 2011 was a rebuilding year for the Wildcats. We had they were pretty much sloppy, and they wound up firing. Like I said before, they had fired Mike Stoops halfway through the year. But there is one game that does come to mind for this particular year, and it's one of my and it happens to be my favorite, one of my favorite all-time moments of Arizona during Arizona's time in the Pac. We were hosting UCLA the week after our bye week and the week after we fired Mike Stoops, and the Arizona Wildcats were leading 42-7 as we were about to hit halftime. We had a couple seconds left on the clock. UCLA was trying to squeeze in one final play before going to halftime. So we heard whistles blow. We don't know what the hell happened. Somebody was running the field, and a referee costume. We thought it was a referee that was trying to stop it. Okay. And it turns out to have been a student from the Zona Zoo section, because as soon as he came up and tried to get the ball, he started running to the other side of the field, and he took off his referee costume. He was running around in his underwear. And of course, he didn't get pretty far because security was all over him, and he wound up going to jail. Okay? Whether he went to jail, we don't know what the hell happened with this guy. But this play has been on. This game has been, let's see. Now this play right here has been circulating on YouTube ever since it happened. So let's see if I can, okay. Now this is the, okay. So here we go. Devoted fan Jace Lankow. Okay, that is basically who it was. He presented himself in a Speedo on the U of A football field against UCLA. This is the only video where you'll see the. Okay, now basically, there is a video circulating online that was posted the same time that the same night that this game actually took place, and it was a Thursday night game, might I add. So the whole country was watching this. Okay, boy, you're so proud of yourself, huh? Okay, okay. Comments going all around saying, "I don't care what the criminal penalty he faced. This guy is a legend." Okay. He did. Now, of course, it says that this player was eventually charged with misdemeanor trespassing after the police dropped a heavier charge against him. He spent a night in jail and had to do 4 hours of community service. Just 4? God, give me a break. And he had to complete the community service in order to graduate from the University of Arizona. No word about additional punishments, however, small fun. This kid actually turns out to have been a wildlife biologist major at the University of Arizona, and the incident didn't come up in his interview, which is wild. Okay, the kid was able. Okay, I will have to post this video on the description to my video. Okay, because this is a game you won't want to miss. The Wildcat. This would be only the second win Wildcats would get all year long. They eventually would finish in 4. Okay, and of course you have the 20. That same year, we also won at Sun Devil Stadium against the Sun Devils, and that would be the last time the Wildcats would win at Sun Devil Stadium until this past season. Okay. So let's see. 2012 is our first meeting against Colorado as a Pac-12 member in Arizona Stadium. Now, of course, Arizona and Colorado had played each other quite a handful of times prior to our admission into the Pac-12. The last time that we played each other as a non-conference opponents was in 1986, which coincidentally happened to have been the only time the Wildcats had beaten the Buffaloes going into this 2012 matchup, which was homecoming, by the way. And even though the Buffaloes got off to a strong start, the Wildcats would ride all over the Buffaloes late in the game. And that game, might I add, would give the Wildcats 6 wins for their sixth victory for the year, and would make them bowl eligible for the first time since 2010. Okay. Then we have 2013. Now, of course, the Wildcats. This is the game that wound up giving the Wildcats bowl eligibility. Um, and of course, the most spectacular part about this game was that the Oregon Ducks were the number 5 seed going into this game, and they were in the front row contention for the Pac-12 North, and they were also on the ropes of a potential BCS national championship appearance, and they come into Tucson, of course. Now, of course, it was raining that day, and it was an early day game, and not many people were in the stadium. So the game gets off the start, and the Oregon Ducks, they throw their first pass. The Arizona Wildcats, let me see if I can pull this game up. Okay, 2013. Okay, 20. Bear with me, guys, okay? One of 3 times the Wildcats had let's see. Yeah, one of the few times the Wildcats had played nationally ranked schools. So this was our only win against a nationally ranked school that year. But basically, Kadeem Carey ran for 206 yards and 4 touchdowns, becoming Arizona's all-time leading rusher. Wildcats pulled off a monumental upset by taking advantage of numerous miscues, shocking the number 5 Oregon Ducks 42-16 in Tucson. The Wildcats achieved their first win over a top 5 team since knocking off the number 2 Oregon Ducks in 2007. And believe me, this was a very strong revenge against Oregon for what they did to us in 2009. Okay? And see if anybody else has anything to say. No, they don't. Arizona. Okay, it was pretty much all Arizona from that point forward because Arizona tried to. Okay, Oregon threw a pass on their first play, and Arizona wound up intersecting it. Okay, one of the Wildcat players, I don't remember who it was, he got up in the air, he grabbed the ball, he was about to go in the end zone, he threw it back in bounds, and a Wildcat was there to pick up the ball before it hit the ground, and it resulted in an interception. And from that point forward, it was all Arizona, and it got to the point where the commentators were saying hey, they were basically saying that the students were starting to call. They were going to call their friends. Say, hey, you need to get your ass in here. Arizona's kicking Oregon. Hey, Arizona's kicking Oregon's ass. You need to get in here. This is so cool. Okay. And from that point forward, the Arizona Wildcats did pick up enough victories for that game right there. It gave them. Okay. It gave Arizona their seventh victory for the year, and they finished 4th place in the Pac-12. Okay, they would finish 4-5 in the season that year. Stanford and Arizona State would both secure seats in the conference championship game, which the conference championship game began in 2011 with the addition of Utah and Colorado. But Arizona would eventually get their seat in the conference championship game the following year, where we took on the Oregon Ducks. And speaking of which, 2014, another notorious season for the Arizona Wildcats, the year which it was our third 10-win season in program history, and our last until 2023. Okay. So for 2014, Couple games do come to mind. Now, basically, you have the Oregon. You have the conference opener versus Cal, which Cal was leading pretty much the whole time through. Arizona was on their final play. They had a couple seconds left. They were about like half a field left to go. They were way too out of range. They were down a couple points, but they were far out of range from a potential. See, they were down 2 points, 43-45. Wildcats were too far out for a potential field goal to win the game. So they wound up having to throw a Hail Mary into the end zone. An Arizona player caught the ball in bounds during that play, and it gave the Wildcats a 49-45 victory. Okay. The following, okay, so that gave the Wildcats their first conference. It gave the Wildcats their first conference opener victory for quite some time. Okay. Now, the following week. All right. Now, of course, the Wildcats think they would have a bye week in there or something. Yeah, I believe the Wildcats had 2 bye weeks that year. Okay, they wound up having a bye week in between, and then the Wildcats would eventually host the Oregon Ducks on a Thursday night game in Eugene, Oregon. Okay, now of course nobody gave Arizona any chance of this game. Nobody. Okay. Home opener, the Ducks defeated the South Dakota Coyotes 62-13. Okay. Oops. Okay. In a week that saw 11 of the top 25 teams, including 5 of the top 8, all undefeated, be upset in conference play, the Ducks were upset for the second straight year by the Arizona Wildcats in the school's 100th consecutive sellout of Autzen Stadium. The Ducks won the coin toss, elected to receive, and eventually forced to turn the ball over on downs, having converted 4th down earlier in the opening drive. The Wildcats capitalized by scoring a 28-yard field goal. Okay. Now, basically, the Wildcats maintained possession going into the fourth quarter with a 10-point deficit to make up. They finished their drive with a 21-yard field goal by Matt Wolgan, putting the score 24-17 Arizona. The Ducks' defense then forced a turnover on downs, giving the ball back to their offense, which scored a touchdown on a 9-yard pass from Mariota to Keenan Lowe, even the score out at 24. The Wildcats then drove 71 yards in 5.5 minutes, scoring on a 1-yard touchdown run by Terry Jones-Grisby. The Ducks, with just under 3 minutes left to play, were driving quickly down the field, converting the first 2 downs, only to be stopped by a strip sack of Mariota by Scooby Wright III. Is where Arizona winds up getting the reference Scooby Snacks. Okay? Wildcats then ran the clock out, sealing their second victory over the Ducks in as many years. The Ducks maintained their lead in the overall series 24-16. However, every victory earned by the Wildcats since 2007 has been a major upset of the Ducks, with each win coming over an Oregon team ranked in the top 10 at the time of the game. Okay? The main storyline following the game continued to the Ducks' belittled offensive line, allowing Mariota to be sacked 5 times during the game. Okay? Now, of course, and then of course we had, so that was, okay, the 2 games that basically got the Wildcats into high gear, but it would be the Arizona State game at the end of the season in Tucson that would eventually decide who would win the South Division. In the final 2 minutes of the Territorial Cup, it was after all the other games got decided, it turns out that the winner of the Territorial Cup was going to win the Pac-12 South. More reason for both schools to put all in against each other. And of course, the Wildcats, they wound up defeating the Sun Devils 42-35 in that game, giving the Wildcats the South Division title and a trip to the conference championship in Santa Clara. Now, of course, that particular year was the first time that the conference championship game was played at a neutral site. Before then, it was played at the school with the better conference record. And of course, after receiving feedback from the three schools that had hosted the conference championship game, Stanford, Oregon, and Arizona State, they realized there was a lot. Okay, the schools were given less than 7 days notice. They were given just a few days notice to put a whole game together that usually takes a whole off season. Okay, you have to reserve the stadium. You have to get parking transportation on board. You have to run all the security and all this other stuff. Like all these arrangements and stuff that you see usually takes a whole off season. Okay, or a good part of it. And these schools were expected to do it in such a short amount of time. But of course, at that point, the Pac-12 didn't really have hardly had any attractive NFL stadiums. Okay, you had the Mile High Stadium up in Denver for the Denver Broncos. You had the University of Phoenix Stadium in Glendale. Probably would have been the most reliable source or most reliable site. And of course, Los Angeles did not have any NFL team at the time, so the early stadiums were the Rose Bowl and the Coliseum. And then in San Francisco, you had Candlestick Park and the Oakland County Coliseum, which were both in shitty despair. And then up in Washington, you had the Seahawks' City Central Lake Field, or Quest Stadium, whatever you want to call it, like their Seahawks Stadium. Okay, like you had the Seahawks Stadium, you had the Cardinals Stadium, or the Broncos Stadium. They were the only ones that were pretty much reliable. Pac-12 wasn't thrilled with any of those three, so they decided to say, let's give it to the school with the better site. But after receiving the feedback, they figured, yeah, I think we made a mistake. And luckily, around the same time, the 49ers had opened up a brand new stadium in Santa Clara called Levi's Stadium. So they decided to move the conference championship game into that facility. And then after the pandemic came to an end, the Raiders wound up opening up their new stadium down in Las Vegas, and the Pac-12 decided to move their conference championship game to Las Vegas because, after all, men's basketball, they wound up moving their conference championship, their men's and women's conference tournaments, to Las Vegas around 2013 when they built the T-Mobile Arena. That arena was built in an effort to help attract a potential NHL expansion team, which they wind up getting for the Vegas Golden Knights, to be exact. Okay, Wildcats won 2015. Like the highlight for that year was Arizona had no bye week. They had to go play 12 weeks in a row, and they depended on Scooby Wright for every one of their games. And unfortunately, he wound up doing what you're not supposed to do: get injured. Like you get injured, the whole team's screwed, and there's no bye week to have a player rest. Okay, he's got to get back out there and he's got to keep worrying. And the whole team as a whole, they get worn out by the time it's all over with. But the Wildcats were lucky enough to go 6-6, including a win over Utah, which would happen to be the last win over Utah until 2023. Okay. 2016 Wildcats, pretty bad. Pretty much won't go much into it, but the Wildcats only had one conference win for that whole season, and fortunately for the Wildcats, that one conference win happened to have been the most important one of them all: Arizona State, and it happened to have been right here in Tucson. So let me pull this back up here. So the most notorious thing about this particular game is that basically it was all field goal. I mean, it was all touchdowns. There were no field goals scored. Even though Arizona, they wound up winning against Grambling State in Hawaii early on in the conference play, and they barely lost to Brigham Young up in Glendale, Arizona, in the Cardinal Stadium. The Wildcats they managed to finish the season on a high note with a victory over Arizona State. And it happened to be the first time since Rich Rod took over the program that the Wildcats did not make a bowl bid. Okay, and the one thing that we wind up learning, even though that this Arizona versus BYU matchup was scheduled for Glendale as early as 2013, the Wildcats had pretty much learned their lesson not to play any more games in the Cardinals football stadium, especially after what had happened in the 2014, after their experience with the Fiesta Bowl against Boise State, and of course BYU. Clearly evident that the fans, Arizona fan, despite the fact that it is this Arizona Wildcat country, and the university is just 2 hours away with a huge U of A fan base in the Phoenix Metro, this team does not travel. The fan base for football does not travel, and they don't travel well, and they don't show their support when it's needed. Okay? Clear example. When BYU, I actually attended the Cactus kickoff against BYU. BYU sold out their whole section, and they started buying up Arizona. We had BYU fans in the Arizona section. What the hell are you doing here? This is our section. They sold out. Well, that's no excuse. You should be out of luck. Now, of course, can't blame the Wildcats because Arizona Wildcat fans should have bought up those seats and should have locked BYU out of those areas. Okay? This is the game right here that made me hate BYU. And okay, I'm going to tell you guys right now, we're not very fond. Okay, there's very prejudice against a couple of schools. BYU, Utah, in general. Definitely Arizona State. All right. BYU. Okay, you call BYU. They call themselves a Mormon school. Well, they're not very Mormon-like in the football stadium. Okay. Same with the Utes. They're very both BYU and Utah fan bases. They're complete assholes in the stadium. They're very rude. They're very disrespectful. And when they're beating the Wildcats, they get in your face, and all you want to do is punch them right back. Okay? There was a time in the 2019 season, okay, I had season tickets for the Wildcats in 2018 and 2019. And during that game, the final home game for the Wildcats in 2019, Utah, that's a game I regret going to because we had this asshole Utah fan sitting about 2 rows right behind me, screaming at me the whole first half. Got to a point, okay, I couldn't take this anymore. I wanted to get out of there, but I didn't want to have anything to do with him. I wound up having to text security to help escort me out of the stadium. That's how much I feared for my life. Sure, go ahead and laugh all you want. This isn't funny, you know. Okay? Okay? You think I'm going to tolerate this? You got another thing coming. Alright? So, we had victory. We had a win over Arizona State. That was the most notorious game for that. 2017 onward, 2023 was a miraculous season. We've all experienced it firsthand. So we don't need to cover that. But there is, but we're going to conclude our wrap up of the Pac-12 with what people feel is the greatest game that Arizona had ever played during the time in the Pac. Well, one game does come to mind, especially from many Arizona Wildcat fans. Okay? And for this one, you have to go back to 1986. Okay? It was the 1986 Territorial Cup. Okay? In Arizona Stadium. Okay? And basically, this game was played November 22nd. I don't know if this was Thanksgiving or the week after. I don't know what. Probably. It most likely was Thanksgiving week. I don't know if this. Most likely this wasn't Thanksgiving week, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But basically, in the regular season finale, okay, or at least what was supposed to be, Arizona State comes into this game having already won the conference championship and the Rose Bowl berth. But, okay, Arizona, that's not going to stop the Wildcats, okay? See, the Sun Devils had already, they came into this game undefeated, with a perfect undefeated record, with their only hiccup was in week 3 where they tied against Washington State 21-21. They pretty much won the rest of the way out, okay? They came to this game number 4 in the country, okay? And they were on the verge of a national championship title as well, okay? For the Wildcats, they weren't going to let that happen, okay? The Wildcats defense shut down the Sun Devils offense for most of the game, including a goal line stand in the third quarter. In the fourth quarter, ASU, down 24-10, drove down the field and attempted to cut into Arizona's lead. Quarterback Jeff Van Raphorst dropped back and lofted a pass into the end zone. However, Wildcat safety Chuck Cecil intercepted the pass, ran back the other way down the sideline for a 100-yard touchdown return, and gave the Wildcats a 31-10 lead that sent Arizona Stadium and the city of Tucson into a frenzy. The play led to Arizona grabbing momentum, and ASU would not recover from it for the rest of the game. The Wildcats would go on to win this game 34-17, giving the Sun Devils their first and only loss for the year, and immediately ended ASU's chances for a possible national championship. Arizona fans often declare Cecil's pick six as the greatest moment in Wildcat football history, not just in the U of A ASU rivalry. Okay? Now, of course, overall, okay? Okay? Now, if you're going to look back, like I mentioned before, the Wildcats, they lead the series overall 51 wins to 44 and one tie. That one tie came in 1987 with a 24-24 tie between the two. Okay. If you were to look back in the Territorial Cup matchup, if you were to look back just at the time that Arizona and Arizona State had played each other in the Pac-10 and Pac-12, the 46 seasons that we had played together. Okay. Now, of course, only 45 of these games only 45 out of the 46 games do count towards the statistics because, like I mentioned before, Arizona State was forced to vacate their win in 2021 for reasons which we've already mentioned. Okay? But with both teams leaving the Pac-12 conference beginning with the 2024 season, the University of Arizona has officially won the series between the two teams during their time in the Pac-10, Pac-12. Arizona Wildcats finish with 23 wins compared to 21 wins for the Sun Devils and the one tie in 1987. Okay? Now, of course, this is after you configure. Now, of course, it would have been 23, 22, and 1, but one of those wins for the Sun Devils was vacated. So it's 23, 21, and 1. And the Arizona Wildcats the 2-game winning streak they have right now going is what gave the Wildcats the win. Okay? That's what wound up giving them the edge during their time in the Pac. Now, what happens going into the Big 12? That's to be answered. Okay? So Arizona overall has had a really good. Okay. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to. Okay. Uh, see if I can look up to this one right here. So, give me 1 second here. Okay. Okay. Give me 1 second. I think we are going to. All right. All right. So you take a look at the four. You take a look at the Arizona's time versus the Pac-12. We played a total. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but okay. Okay. We played a total of 409 games against Pac-12 opponents, winning 182, losing 220, and 7 ties. I'm not sure exactly how many of these are. Okay, Arizona versus the Pac. Okay, so overall, 182 to 227 to 7. Okay. When you look back, okay, well, wait a second. What the hell is Idaho and Montana doing here? Okay. They don't belong in here. But basically, the Wildcats have the winning edge over Arizona State, a winning edge over California, 19, 15, and 2. Colorado, they dominated 9-4. Oregon, they've lost to Oregon 16-28. They have they have the advantage over Oregon State 25, 16-1. Southern Cal is 8-37. Stanford, Arizona has the losing edge 15-17. UCLA, they have an 18-27-2 record against. Arizona has a losing record against Utah 5-7 and a losing record to Washington 11-26-1. But they do have a winning record over Washington State 28-19. Okay. You take a look at the Pac-12 by decade. The best season was basically in the 1990s, with the 1980s was their best one with 57.8% winning percentage, compared to 56.2 in the 1990s. So, the 80s and 90s were the Wildcats' best years in the Pac during their time in the Pac-10. Okay. 7-2. Okay. So this is according to MQ.net. Okay. So that's basically Arizona in a nutshell during their time in the Pac-10. It's been one hell of a ride. We've enjoyed playing these other schools, the LA schools, Stanford and Cal, Oregon State, Washington State. Okay. We will be heading over to the Big 12 with Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. But as for the others, it was nice playing with you. And who knows when we will play the other schools once again. Arizona's non-conference schedule, for the most part, is booked up through the end of the 2033 season, with a couple of openings, might I add. We have a couple of spots in 2026 and 2027. Future opponents, okay? Arizona has a couple of open slots in 26 and 27, which were originally occupied by BYU, but have since been vacated due to BYU joining and Arizona becoming conference rivals with one another. And then we also have an open slot in 2032. Okay, so who knows whether or not Arizona will play, whether those slots will be filled by former Pac-12 opponents or if they'll be filled by somebody else. But my guess is the next time Arizona will eventually play any of these games will likely be in a bowl bid, whether it's the college football playoff or in another college football bowl game of a lower resort. Either way, this has been a fun time for the Wildcats. We have a new journey ahead of us, and it'll be extraordinary to see. Okay, and even though we have a couple of known rivals that are going to be going with us, it's going to be interesting to see how well the Arizona Wildcats will do against these other schools that we will be going to be playing with. Some of which we have not played, some of which we have played before, but not in a long time, and others we have hardly played at all, and there's others that we have never played yet, but we'll eventually get our first shot at playing them within the next year or two. Okay, that's all we have for today. Arizona. Okay, it was basically a fun ride, but now we are heading off to a new chapter, the Big 12. Until the next time we meet, Mr. Wildcat reminding you all to be good, be careful, and behave. And now we're about to sign off with the Arizona alma mater. All hail Arizona, thy colors red and blue stand as a symbol of our love for you. All hail Arizona, to thee we will be true. We'll watch over and keep you. All hail, all